Good day. My name is Michael Mulondo, and I'm going to present on the subject Psychological Counseling 2. The code is PC20S2. This presentation is divided into two parts. The first part is going to look at the preparation for the exam, to give you some practical guidelines on what you can look at and what you need to do to prepare yourself for the examination. I'm going to say some practical guidelines, some tips which can help you, and so that you can make sure that when you're going to write the exam that you are ready. The second part of the presentation will look at the content of the presentation itself, and what makes this presentation very important, and I'm going to explain to you. Just remember that this presentation is just a guidance to help you to prepare for your upcoming exam. It's not what you need to limit. It's not there to limit yourself in your preparation. So you are still expected to study the whole manual, to read through the whole manual, study manual, and to have a better understanding on psychological counseling. So this is a scope, this is a guidance, just to help you so that you can prepare you accordingly. The first thing is I'm going to look at two things, what you have to do before the exam and then also during the exam. The first thing is give yourself 2 months of preparation. And it's advisable that you need to come up with a timetable 2 months before the exam, before you're going to write your exam, just to prepare yourself. And during this time, you have to look at different aspects. You have to look at, for example, all the subject. This might be only one of many subjects that you're going to write, but as you're going to prepare, it can be a month, it can be 2 months, but you have to divide the chapters and the subjects within these 2 months as part of your preparation. So there are 3 things that you have to do during this preparation, which is part of your timetable or time schedule, is to read through the subjects and the chapters as part of your preparation in order to understand the content and the context of the subject. So after you've done that, is to make notes, looking at the keywords, and then also some concept that you don't understand. Then thirdly is to revise a week before or 2 weeks before. It all depends on you as part of your preparation for the examination. Then during the exam, you have to read through all the questions when you have the paper in front of you, and as you are reading through the question, you have to look or select the best question that you know you can answer and which is easy to answer. And after that, then you have to read through the question that you have selected in order to understand what the content of the question is. And then fourth and lastly is you have to answer the question. Don't interpret the question, answer the question. And you can only answer the question if you understand what the question is all about. So we're going to go to the second part, is we're going to look at the content of this subject. Now there is so many issues that I'm going to cover, and as I said, the subject is all about counseling, and I'm going to give some examples. Now the first thing is looking at counseling, and then we're going to look at homosexuality, we're going to look at different sexual orientation, and then also we're going to look at different minority groups. Now, when you do counseling, just remember there are certain principles which are the same, but the methodology of counseling can differ from one target group to another target group. The way how you counsel young people will be different how you will counseling adults. The way how you counsel a woman will be different than you will counsel a man. The principle might be the same, but the methodology might be different. Now, one of the examples that I want to give is, for example, sexual orientation, where people have different sexual orientation and preferences. How are you going to counsel people with different preferences? For example, homosexuality or gays. This is something that you have to look at. Now, when you get a question such as this, the first thing that you have to look is you have to define counseling in its context and totality. Explain what is counseling. Different counseling method you can also discuss. Then secondly, you're going to look at different sexual orientation, homosexuality, gay, bisexual, lesbians, and so on, heterosexual. So these are different sexual orientation that you can use, and you have to choose a specific orientation that will suit you. And once you have choose a certain sexual orientation, then you have to explain how does that sexual orientation, how are you going to use it in your counseling session, for example. So when somebody is having a specific sexual orientation or preferences, you have to make sure that in that sexual orientation the person having is, you need to use certain methodology in your counseling. So if a person is asking question, for example, how are you going to make sure that that person will then be counseled when it comes to its own sexual orientation? Then, of course, the other aspect that you can also look at counseling is people living with HIV/AIDS. How are you going to assess people that are HIV positive in this counseling session? How are you going to prepare them for the counseling session? What will be the content of the counseling session? What do you need to look at as part of the counseling session? What are the no-nos? What are the most important aspect that you have to talk about people living with HIV and when you're going to counsel them? So you might find somebody that it's his first time that is coming for the counseling. So how are you going to assess that person, for example, to accept his or her status? So it's very important in the to make sure. And then, of course, you're also going to look at HIV infection and what role does it play? What impact does it have on children? What do you do with children that are being infected with HIV? What about babies, where you've got the mother that's irresponsible or does not use her ARV and the baby is born positive? So this is also something that you have to look at and discuss in detail. What does HIV infecting does to children? So first explain what is HIV/AIDS. Give the difference between HIV and AIDS. And then you have to look at co-infections, what kind of infections. Then you can look also at opportunistic infections, especially when the person is having the syndrome or reach that level of full-blown AIDS. So you have to discuss it. And then you're going to link those infections with children. When you talk about children, what type of children are you talking about? How can children be exposed to HIV infection? You have to talk about the vulnerability of children. You have to talk about the factors that are associated to the infection of children. So you have to talk in details, or you have to write in detail what those aspects are. And then, of course, VCT, volunteer counseling and testing, which is very important. You start off with pre-test counseling, you go up to post-test counseling, and then you go to ongoing counseling, HIV counseling. So VCT does play a very important role. In your submission, discuss in detail why you need a VCT, why VCT is very important, and so on. So there are also challenges with regard to VCT, looking at the setting, the infrastructures, resources, human resources, financial resources, also looking at the long-term sustainability of VCTs. And what do you do where there is no more VCTs or volunteer counseling testing centers in a country? Why are they so important? And then coming to sustainability, looking at the role of government, who's going to make sure that you will have ongoing VCT, volunteer counseling sessions, infrastructures, or whether you've got intervention on VCT in a country. So you have to discuss about that. And then also HIV positive testing, which is very important. Why people need to go for a test, why is HIV testing so important. And remember, as I said, and I want to remind you again, the purpose of this presentation is just to give you a guideline. It does not replace your preparation, your reading of the whole manual. It only complements what you already know and what you have to go through and study for the exam. And then, of course, you have to explain the difference between pre-test and post-test counseling. What is pre-test counseling? What does pre-test counseling entails? How long does it take? All right, and then of course before the pre-test counseling, after the pre-test counseling, how long do you wait before you can go for post-test counseling, for example? What is a post-test counseling? Now the word pre and post explains it. P means before the test and post means after the test. And then the test is, what kind of test is this? Is it an ELISA test? Is it a rapid testing? Is it a diagnostical testing? You have to discuss. There's a PCR testing. You have to discuss in detail what this testing is all about. And then, of course, how this testing then is then linked to HIV/AIDS. Now, many times when people are writing, or they respond, or they write in the exam about this kind of counseling, they only write, for example, about testing in general. So in your examination paper, you have to write in detail, you have to explain in detail what this test is all about and what it entails. Because if you do not explain that in detail, that it will give an indication to the marker or the person that's marking your paper that you don't have an understanding, or you don't know the difference between the pre-test and the post-test counseling. And of course, when we talk about pre-test and post-test counseling, it is linked to HIV/AIDS. And so very important when you want to know what the situation in your bloodstream, this is something that they will have to do. Then, of course, couple counseling. Now, there are different types of couple counseling that you find. And when we talk about couples, now in your submission, you have to explain different couples, different types of couple. You've got what we call bisexual couples, you've got heterosexual, you've got homosexual couples. So you have to explain then in detail how are you going to counsel these different types of counseling in your examination. So when you are going to write it, explain in detail about this different counseling. What you can also do is, when you are describe or define the different types of couples, then also you can also mention what type of counseling technique will you use. You can go further also to discuss what type of counseling theory will you apply, the type of theory that you will apply in this type of couple counseling. And as you will do that, you will find that it will be much easier to answer the question. And so, as I said earlier, you still need to read through the whole chapter, you still need to read through the whole book just to have an understanding what the subject is all about. So when you're going to follow the guidelines, as I've mentioned earlier, in preparation of your examination, and whether it's as preparing a timetable, you will find yourself that when you get the question paper in front of you, you will have a better understanding on the content and then also on the context of the subjects. The mistake that many students are doing, especially during the exam when they prepare themselves, is when they read a question and they do not understand the question, they just leave the question blank. So you will find it very amazing, as I explained earlier, that your brain works like a computer hard drive. You collect, you store information, and then you retrieve information. So even if you don't understand the question, try to answer the question. You will be very surprised that what you put on the paper, it will be able to make sense, especially for those that's going to mark your question. So I hope that this presentation has helped you as a guidance for you to prepare, and will help you to prepare for your exam. And I thank you for listening and watching at me. Thank you very much. Bye.